Hello and welcome to Founded, where we find the stories you missed in history class because the tea was hot before they dumped it into the harbor. I'm Tori Phantom, and joining me today is someone that I've never seen churn butter, Gwenna Lathland.
I have churned butter multiple times. Willingly. Like, I wasn't even a school field trip where they took you to the little farm homestead and like made you churn the butter with the actual. I have willingly decided, you know what? I hate myself and will just make my own butter. Here's some cream. It's not fun. I don't recommend it.
I've churned butter to get buttermilk before when I could have just put vinegar and milk.
Vinegar and milk, yeah.
I get a little extra sometimes. Are you ready for your pop quiz?
Are any of the questions about churning butter?
No.
Okay.
Sorry. First question, who is Cadwallader Colden?
He was the governor of New York. He was the acting governor several times. He kept coming in and just like doing a very bad acting job.
Horrible job. He was the lieutenant governor, and then stuff kept happening to the governors, and they'd be like, Cadwallader, you're back in. And he'd be like, okay, cool, I'm going to make everyone mad.
Cadbury bunny, this mess. Let's make it worse. Stir, stir, stir.
And what was the Battle of Golden Hill?
Some people. It was technically the first battle, and some people died. I don't remember.
It was technically the first battle of the American Revolution. It was an armed conflict between the soldiers and the people of New York. And things got incredibly chaotic. You want to hear more about that? Check out our last episode. But next question.
Hang on, let me go listen again. I clearly didn't pay enough attention the first time.
What were the non-importation agreements?
Boycotts before we used the term boycott.
Yeah. And last question, who was in charge of Boston? Or at least who was supposed to be in charge of Boston?
So they were, Francis was fleeing across the ocean. He got stuck on a boat for a little bit. And then Tommy Boy, Thomas Hutchison, was acting for a bit. He was supposed to be in charge.
He was supposed to be. That's
not who was in charge. Samuel Adams was definitely in charge. John Hancock, he was pretty in charge.
Mm-hmm.
John Adams, he was pretty in charge. James Lightning Boy Otis Jr. Not as in charge as he used to be because he went and got himself real beat up.
He sure did. He sure did.
He was already like tenterhooks not okay, and then the traumatic brain injury he likely sustained via cane didn't help anything.
It did not help even at all. No. Before we get into the regular part of the episode, we do have to follow our rule, and that is where we tell you that we have merch. Several threatening huzzas on a t-shirt. Samuel Adams would be mad about this because he would. You can also get a shirt in honor of Samuel Adams' dog that he trained to bite redcoats. It says, I bite redcoats on command. And we've got stickers, lots of cool stuff. Check the link in the bio. Gwenna, tell them about your book.
I wrote a book. There's geese on the cover. It's called Talk of the Townies. It's about a girl who is real boring. So boring, her boyfriend broke up with her and she decided to torture her entire life, moved to a tiny town and met a cop. He's not boring. There's body parts under the water tower and stolen underwear. Available everywhere you find your favorite books online.
The goose's name is George. Now, on with the show. So on the last episode, we talked about the Liberty Pole, how it was erected, then torn down, then put back up, then torn back down, then put back up and torn back down. You get the point.
They argued a lot about the pole. They ended up fighting with guns, basically about the pole. It was never about the pole, but I promise you at least a couple of those guys were actually fighting about the actual pole, not what the pole represented.
Right. And the grown men,
by the way,
fighting over a giant pole in the ground was a part of what led to the first battle of the American Revolution, the Battle of Golden Hill. But there was also a pamphlet to the betrayed inhabitants of the city and colony of New York. And that pamphlet criticized the New York Assembly, pointing out the corruption and attacking the governor and the leading faction, the Delanceys. So Cadwallader Colden and the leading faction in the assembly were big mad about the pamphlet. They condemned it as a false, seditious, and infamous libel and a 21-1 vote. The one, of course, being Philip Schuyler. The man was loaded, but little did he know that the 100-pound bounty put out on the author of the pamphlet would be paid out. That's over $20,000 in today's money, by the way.
If you're not watching this on the video form, which you should absolutely be watching this on the video form, Tori's smug little smile for that Hamilton full-on slip was very gratifying, okay? Just smugness over there.
I made myself laugh writing that, yeah.
Yeah.
The way that they ended up catching this guy was also super petty, by the way.
They're New Yorkers. Go on.
True. You see, there was this ex-employee who had just been fired from the print shop where the pamphlet originated, who was really mad at the printer who fired him. And since he was unemployed, he had time to become a tattletale, and he went to Cadwallader Colden with the details. So a warrant went out for the publisher, and while Cadwallader and his comrades questioned the printer, the sheriff went to interrogate his apprentices at the shop, threatening them with imprisonment to get the name of the author.
Reminder, we don't have freedom of press or freedom of speech in this world. That would not be invented for these people later. So if you're thinking, they can't do that, they 100% could. They could definitely put warrants out for someone's arrest because they didn't like what you printed.
And they often did.
Yeah.
Which is how they were able to arrest Alexander McDougall. Now, the second that McDougall was jailed, he became a martyr for the cause and was soon known as the Wilkes of America. Now, we've talked about John Wilkes briefly before, but quick refresher, he was a hero to the American patriots. John Wilkes was a radical journalist in London who started his own paper, The North Briton, and in issue 45, he criticized a speech the king made that had been written by Lord Bute and was imprisoned for seditious libel. So Wilkes and Liberty and number 45 became the battle cry of patriots on both sides of the ocean. And so when McDougall was first arrested, the Chief Justice tried to get him to plead guilty, but McDougall refused and insisted on a jury trial. So he went to jail.
Okay.
And the Sons of Liberty were absolutely disgusted with his treatment. So on February 14th, 1770, the 45th day of the year, 45 men dined with him in jail, eating 45 pounds of steak from a 45-month-old steer.
The numerology of this time period, they would weaponize everything they could just to... Y'all complain about millennials needing symbolism for everything? I present to you the founding freaking fathers.
Literally. But McDougall was excited to be, quote, the first sufferer for liberty since the commencement of our glorious struggles.
Okay, listen, there are some folks in Boston who would like to argue that point, but go on.
Yeah, he continued to write about his circumstance, saying, quote, let it be tried, let it be fairly tried, whether the freedom of speech and the freedom of writing are not the natural effect of the freedom of our excellent Constitution, and whether on suppressing that freedom, the Constitution can possibly survive.
It can't. Just spoiler.
Yeah, well... When the first trial came about in a 15-3 vote, the jury found him guilty of being a man of, quote, turbulent and unquiet mind, and that he was responsible for publishing a wicked, false, seditious, scandalous, malicious, and infamous libel that interrupted the public peace, meant to elicit the greatest hatred, scandal, and contempt and infamy towards those in power.
Hey, in case you forgot, the right to trial by jury is a fairly new concept for us. And while, yes, we had jury trials, they definitely cherry-picked those guys to the side they wanted them to swing to. Whoever had the better lawyer got the better jury. Mm-hmm. And McDougall didn't really have a lawyer. He didn't have to have one. They weren't required to let them have Miranda rights didn't exist until deep into American history.
Well, and at this time, the law profession was kind of looked down upon. They were looked at as like skeevy people, and it was kind of new. That's why oftentimes judges didn't even have a law background because they found it could be worse. Like lawyers were known to use big language to shift things into their favor, what they wanted. So they thought that men with good virtue, good values, they would do a better job not knowing about the law.
Yeah.
And so Alexander McDougall was bound over for a Supreme Court trial. And his bail was set and paid between McDougall and some fellow Sons of Liberty. So after 80 days in jail, 600 people walked him home, and he gave a speech promising to defend the liberties of the people, even at the expense of his own life and fortune. McDougall believed that if political leaders didn't honestly represent their constituents and didn't act responsibly, then that power needed to be checked, and that if necessary, government could take place on the streets.
Hey, go ahead and say that part again.
Yeah, he believed that if political leaders didn't honestly represent their constituents and didn't act responsibly, then that power needed to be checked, and that if necessary, government could take place on the streets.
No particular reason you needed to say it again.
Of course not. So, in waiting for his Supreme Court hearing, the owner of the print shop, that publisher, randomly hamstered, and then the guy who narked on McDougall received so many threats of a tarring and feathering that he fled to Boston, of all places.
That was not the better choice, Pumpkin. What? Boston?
Right? That's exactly how I reacted. And then obviously from there he did end up going on to England. But that meant suddenly there were no direct witnesses or evidence against McDougall, so the charges were dropped. But that wasn't enough for Cadwallader and the faction in power. So they decided to bring him in for questioning about his authorship with the Assembly, think like a congressional hearing type thing.
Yeah.
But McDougall refused to incriminate himself, saying to answer the question of whether he authored this pamphlet would constitute double jeopardy.
We didn't have a Fifth Amendment at this point either, so he could absolutely be compelled to incriminate himself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly it. So the House members were super mad, and one of them even recommended that they might torture a confession out of him. And things kept escalating, and McDougall ended up raising his fist and declared that he'd rather have his right hand cut off at the bar of the court than to resign his rights and privileges as a British subject. And some said he should be jailed for his behavior, and when he refused to leave the house, saying, "Go ahead, jail me," he was, until the assembly was dissolved by the new governor 3 months later. So what began as a fight against the Quartering Act turned into a fight for freedom of the press, free speech, trial by jury, and freedom from arbitrary arrest.
We have amendments for all of those now, by the way. Those are codified rights that we were given at the establishment of our government. Those are codified rights that we were given at the establishment of our current system of governance.
I wonder why.
Wonder why. But wonder why it's important to remember where we got them. Just.
But Alexander McDougall would go on to be a major general in the Continental Army, one of the father of our country, George Washington's top generals. But there was, in fact, a new royal governor on his way to New York. The new governor was one Lord Dunmore, who would go on to be the governor of Virginia a year after arriving in New York. The same Lord Dunmore who was responsible for Dunmore's proclamation in 1775. That proclamation is the one that offered freedom to enslaved people who fled to fight for the British side. But that's all the way in 1775. We're still in February 1770.
Right.
When the first battle of the revolution occurred, and factionalism was on the rise, not just in the government, but also in the Sons of Liberty. But I wonder what was happening back in Boston. I'm kidding. I know it was happening. I'm going to tell you.
Hey, Tori, while all this was going on and they were basically writing what would become our Constitution, or at least examining the problems we would solve with our Constitution, what was happening in Boston?
I'm so glad you asked. By the end of 1769, only 2 regiments remained in occupied Boston, which was still a lot of soldiers, and incidents between the townspeople and the soldiers were on the rise, of course. But as the year 1769 came to a close, there were more problems than just soldiers. Because you remember that non-importation agreement that was a little weird this time around?
Yeah, Boston was being odd about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that one wasn't set to continue until they got what they wanted. It was set to end with the year.
Yeah, right.
But the thing is, the non-importation agreement was working. In numbers alone, imports from England across the colonies dropped about 15% between 1768 and 1769. So they knew that they were having an effect.
Mm-hmm.
And there were rumors that the Townshend Acts would be repealed, but rumors weren't enough. It was clear to the patriot leaders that the agreement needed to be extended until their goals were achieved. However, not everyone was on board. Unsurprisingly, because it was hard to get everyone on board in the first place.
It's just difficult to live under a non-importation or boycott agreement, because a lot of times what that is you go without, or what you do get a hold of is significantly worse or harder to work with or not as good or doesn't go as far because you're having to make do.
Mm-hmm. And merchants who can't sell anything struggle.
Correct.
So obviously merchants wanted to go back to business, and they wanted their goods that had been stored in the Merchant Association's warehouse back.
Mm-hmm.
So the merchant list of non-signers, also known as the enemies of their country, that had been published every single issue of the Boston Gazette, began to grow, because now it didn't just have the people who never signed, but also the people who wanted out. Their names were printed with a disclaimer that people should avoid doing business with these enemies of their country. But interesting about this new list, it marked the first time that women were included on it, specifically Aim and Elizabeth Cummings. Now, the Cummings sisters had been successful shopkeepers for 6 years, and their business would have failed had they stopped importing goods. So when they were asked at the end of 1769 to store their goods at the association's warehouse, they wouldn't. They said they'd never even signed the agreement. And then they're on the list. But Elizabeth was the sister of James Murray. He was the guy who bailed out John Robinson, the one who beat up James Otis Jr., and then had his wig paraded away from the town meeting on a stick.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're related, right? But the Cummings sisters, they likely ended up on the list, not just because they wouldn't sign the agreement, but because they were close with the court faction, the loyalists, and British officials.
So it was guilt a little bit by behavior and mostly by association.
Exactly.
Hey, propaganda goes both ways.
Mm-hmm. But then there was this other merchant, Theophilus Lilly.
Theophilus Lilly is the most beautiful name.
Right.
Theophilus Lilly.
Now, Theophilus had already been deemed an enemy of his country, and he was absolutely fed up with the patriots. He said he was done with the non-importation agreements. He wasn't going to be extending his subscription. And in fact, he had only signed on in the first place because he was pressured to. When Theophilus signed on, he was allowed to store his imported goods above his own store, but he found the regular inspections of his storage to be outrageous. They had a committee that would come and inspect his goods to make sure they were still there.
Almost like acting like your oppressors does not, in fact, ingratiate the people to the cause. Acting like your oppressors does not, in fact, ingratiate people to your cause. You can't stoop to their level and expect different results.
Uh-huh. Yeah, so in December 1769, when the inspectors came to view his goods, Theophilus said no.
I don't. I understand the point of the non-importation agreements because I've got my hindsight 2020 glasses on, but also, yeah, Theophilus, you tell them to keep their no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, according to his account of the incident, one of the committee members went into a rage about it and challenged him, telling him to step outside, threatening to break his neck and his bones and the like.
Right, because that's how civil people handle business dealings. By the way, this is over stuff. Grown men over stuff.
They were very reasonable, not emotional. Yeah.
But women are the emotional ones. Okay.
Yeah, but Theophilus was convinced that others weren't subject to the same treatment and that they were selling their goods without issue. So he decided he was going back to selling, which meant that he was added to the newest merchant list made by the town meeting in early January 1770, condemning them in the papers. And Theophilus took to the papers in response. And on January 15th, he published one of the most inflammatory and accurate statements against the patriots. He said he'd never really been into politics. He was a merchant that stayed in his lane. But he continued saying, quote, that it always seems strange to me that people who contend so much for civil and religious liberty should be so ready to deprive others of their natural liberty. He said that the same men who were fighting against the laws that neither they or their representatives consented to were now making laws that he had to follow when he never gave his consent. And then he pointed out that those laws were actually just kind of there to punish him, because back when he placed his London order, he was told that no one would be compelled to join the non-importation agreement. But then when the goods showed up, he was told that he was required to put them in storage. Now, the point of the non-importation agreement was to distress the English merchants. He said storing his goods didn't serve that goal. He'd already made the purchase, couldn't undo it. And he was pretty sure that the whole point of government was to keep one set of private subjects from punishing another set of private subjects. And he ended this saying, quote, and I own I had rather be a slave under one master, for I know who he is, I may perhaps be able to please him, than a slave to 100 or more who I don't know where to find, nor what they will expect of me.
Yeah. You can't act like your oppressor and then be confused why people are mad.
Yeah, and he was right, but it's still a little bit more complicated to consider because we're looking at it with our modern eyes.
Yes.
Because Theophilus was fighting for his individual liberty, his private interest, which, as we know, was looked down upon at the time. People were supposed to be disinterested. The patriots considered themselves to be fighting for the liberty of the people as a whole, or at least the majority. In fact, Determinatus, Samuel Adams, wrote a response to Theophilus in the Boston Gazette, saying that the social good was above individual liberty. Quote, have you not a right, if you please, to set fire to your own houses, because they are yours? Though in all probability it will destroy a whole neighborhood, perhaps a whole city. Where did you learn that in a state or society you had a right to do as you please?
There's merit in both sides of the argument because they're technically having two different arguments in the same sentence, which makes both of them right and both of them wrong. Samuel Adams and his rabble are bullying people, intimidating them, and acting the exact same as the guys they say are doing it wrong. On the flip side, some of these people are not abiding by, well, it's not working. Well, because you're not doing it. Well, I already paid the money. Correct. But the chances of you not being able to buy more will in fact hurt. That's what we're depriving them of, not the order you'd already made before we decided to non-importation agreement this. But the purchase you will not be able to make the next time. And yes, it's going to hurt and it's going to be hard. And you knew that. You already floated across a boat over here to live on hard mode. Why are you surprised that it's hard?
Exactly. There's merit in both of their arguments. But either way, you're going to be shocked to hear this. a committee was formed.
A committee was formed in Boston. Oh, no.
Who would have thought? That's a new concept.
Let me guess. Samuel Adams is probably involved.
At least on the back end. But this committee was formed to go talk to Theophilus, where they asked him if he was planning to comply with the majority of voters' wishes and stop importing. Now, his reply was recorded in a letter sent by a loyalist to the Crown. He's a Crown reporter. And he said, quote, that they had already ruined him in his business, and if they now wanted his life, they might take it when they pleased. But also, Thomas Hutchinson's sons abandoned the agreement around the same time.
I'm shocked, confused how Tommy Boy Hutchinson's kids would be like, all right, well, we're going to do our own thing because y'all are being weird.
Well, this committee then decided to go talk to everyone.
To the Hutchison boys, yeah.
Yeah. They wanted to talk to everyone who wouldn't recommit to the non-importation agreement until everyone agreed to return to importing. They're like, all or nothing, guys, all or nothing.
You can't bully people into participation or it doesn't work.
But somehow they made it work, But so this committee went out to...
No, we had a whole war. No, that's the thing is it didn't work because we still had a whole freaking war. And not everybody was a patriot. It did not work to bully them into the cause.
Yeah, I mean...
You have to some people on their side. Not force them.
They could get them to comply, but not on their side.
Right. And that's a very important difference. It's a shockingly important difference.
Yeah. And well, so the merchants meeting was happening and they sent this committee out to try to get those merchants to come to the meeting to talk to them. But since none of them showed up, the meeting was adjourned. Though it was reported that the Hutchinsons said they'd put their tea back in storage, subtle foreshadowing. But shortly after, amongst a crowd of 1,000 or so Bostonians, the Committee of Inspection reported that the Hutchinson sons had changed their minds again. They're just pancaking, flip-flop, flip-flop. So it was voted that William Molyneux, along with all who were assembled there, would go to each violator's home, starting with Thomas Hutchinson, where Molyneux would read them a proclamation demanding the return of forbidden goods to the Merchants Association's storage. William Molyneux was a patriot leader you've never heard of. Because
mollusk boy is the only thing I got.
I like it. He died in 1774. But in the early revolution times, like pre-war times, he was a rabble rouser that held as much street cred as Samuel Adams.
Dang.
Yeah. But whereas Samuel Adams was often in the shadows pulling strings, Molyneux was often at the head of the mob. And it was brought to a vote to march down to Thomas Hutchinson's home just because Molyneux wanted to, even though he was told it was a potentially treasonous decision.
Yes, because again, this is the children of the acting governor who, spoiler, he becomes the dang governor. He gets the appointment. They're like, I know we've been leaking it out, but yeah, Thomas Hutchison becomes a bigger problem for everybody, okay? It would, in fact, be treasonous to go attack sons of the acting governor.
Mm-hmm. And the sons of the acting governor still lived with their dad. So Molyneux and his mob showed up at Thomas Hutchinson's house just to talk.
Just to
and just a quick
talk
reminder.
With torches? Because talking with torches feels a little different than just talking.
Yeah, a quick reminder in case anyone forgot about the Hutchinson house hullabaloo, where literally a giant mob tore his house down.
One of the
biggest mansions in Boston. He and
his children had to flee. His daughter had to beg him to leave because he didn't want to. And there were threatening huzzas in that one.
Mm-hmm. A lot of threatening huzzas.
And it ended in his house not being upright anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a rough one. So obviously, Thomas Hutchinson wouldn't let the mob in. He wouldn't let the leaders in.
Yeah.
Instead, he opened a window and started arguing with Molyneux. Molyneux was
Tommy
like,
Boy just arguing with a snail on the. Okay. This is the image I have in my head. Just a snail shouting up in front of.
Yeah, well, Molyneux was like, we're not here for you. We're here for your sons. And Hutchinson was like, my son's agreement was not a binding contract. To which Molyneux replied that they were bound by honor to keep their word.
Listen, we can't. Those are.
Yeah, no one would budge, though. So the crowd moved on to the next house, but they did stay orderly. No huzzas this time.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't get anyone on board.
Yeah.
At least not that day. Some folks did end up changing their minds, including the Hutchinsons, wherein they ended up bamboozling acting Governor Thomas Hutchinson because the Hutchinson sons had agreed to place their tea and the money they had earned through sales under the care of the Merchants Association. But it was reported that Hutchinson himself had met with a leader and helped to negotiate this agreement. However, the Hutchinson sons had privately arranged the meeting and the agreement. It's just that the leader had asked to show the acting governor, Thomas Hutchinson, the minutes of their meeting. Hutchinson obliged, and that decision gave the impression that he was on the side of the non-importation agreements and endorsed the Patriots' efforts to get everyone else on board.
Really, he was just trying to make sure his sons didn't get themselves into a giant hole. He was just looking at the contract. Mm-hmm. That's all he wanted to do.
Uh-huh.
And but he accidentally tagged himself at the event on Facebook.
Yeah. They were able to turn that into propaganda real fast. But of course, there were still more pressing matters than the non-importation agreements, namely the soldiers occupying the town.
I was going to say the two regiments of soldiers still wandering about with, by the way, their commander getting increasingly frustrated because, yeah, he's got two regiments in Boston and they're not being nice. He's literally up in New York dealing with all their stuff. That does not make for a happy commander, and happy commanders do not make great choices.
True. And things were about to reach a boiling point in Boston, too.
Subtle foreshadowing.
Here's the thing, though. All of the colonists were great at playing the victim, as if they were completely innocent and the soldiers were just bloodthirsty and had a hunger that only colonists could satisfy. But in reality, the townspeople enjoyed antagonizing the soldiers very much.
He trained him to bite the redcoats. He trained his dog. This didn't just happen. He was like, get him.
Like they didn't like antagonizing the soldiers as much as they like smuggling, but it was still a lot. Okay. Now, sometimes they were just responding to the soldiers' behaviors, but other times, a lot of times, it was just for fun and or they were drunk. But
it's so incredibly difficult to have conversations wherein we're looking into the past. Be like, well, the redcoats were the bad guys. Okay, but they were there doing a job. Then we wonder, but they were following orders. Okay, but they had a valid explanation for those orders that made perfect, logical, rational sense. These people were being mean to them. These people had enacted tons of riots and torn down the lieutenant governor's house. They tore down the lieutenant governor's house. But then on the other side, the people of Boston are subject to an occupying force that comes with what we've discussed for episodes of problems. So when we're looking at historical conflicts, we know who the winner was. That doesn't make them the right side. There's almost never a right side and a wrong side to any conflict. There's a winning side and a losing side. There is an ideological side that you may agree with and an ideological side that you may disagree with. But that does not make them the right side, because I promise you they did evil things to prove that they were right.
I mean, they like tarring and feathering too. So
they like tarring and feathering too. Okay, all of that intimidation that we laugh and make fancy riot buttons. Yeah, but they were riots.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody was a victim of those.
Mm-hmm.
several innocents were victims of those too, because we only discussed the things that they did do and that the wigs on sticks.
It was kind of an area of effect.
Yeah. There's no good side or there's no bad side. And I want you to remember that when it sounds like we're being merciful to the bad guys. The Redcoats weren't the bad guys. They were just the other side of the war.
Mm-hmm. But I do have a treat for you, Gwenna.
Is it another riot?
Not yet. Soon. I just wanted to let you know that the Redcoats had many nicknames, such as
yes,
Red Herrings, Bloody Backs, Bloody Back Rascals, Bloody Back Thieving Dogs, or Lobster Scoundrel Bloody Back Dogs, or even You Rascals, You Bloody Backs, You Lobster Scoundrels.
I see we got a theme and we really rolled with it. I appreciate that. Lobster, I love. We love some lobster backs. Might have to incorporate that into the episodes more often. We can switch back and forth between the Redcoats and the lobster backs.
Well, so the thing is, fun fact, they would say lobster scoundrels and bloody backs, but the colonists during this time never called the Redcoats lobsterbacks. It is a common myth. I just discovered this, and I'm so excited to share it with you. There is no evidence of the term lobsterback itself being used until the War of 1812.
Huh.
Yeah, but we can giggle about these names, and we should. But it's also important to note that these were much more serious insults than we consider them today. Like, as per the first edition of Webster's Dictionary from 1828, and Noah Webster was a revolutionary guy, by the way, if you didn't know.
We're going to do a whole special episode on Dictionary Boy and the American Revolution.
We sure are. But using that first edition of his dictionary, we're going to figure out what these words meant to them, okay? Rascal, a noun. Rascal, noun, a mean fellow, a scoundrel. In modern usage, a thickish, dishonest fellow, a rogue, particularly applied to men and boys guilty of the lesser crimes and indicating less enormity or guilt than a villain. And then scoundrel, noun, a mean, worthless fellow, a rascal, a low, petty villain, a man without honor or virtue. These insults, or even just calling someone a liar, were serious. The entire society ran on reputation and honor. Calling someone a scoundrel could end in a duel. Lobster was also an insult, a huge insult. It wasn't just used in reference to the redcoats they wore. Because lobster might be a luxury dining food now. Super expensive, right? But back then, lobster was fed to prisoners, servants, and the lower sort. It was poor man's food.
Poor people food. They're bottom feeders. And they're kind of hard to prepare also. I mean, they're not hard to prepare, but it's a lot of work for what you get out of them.
Especially back then.
Yeah.
And but it was available in abundance. Like lobsters would just wash up on the shore. And like you said, they were bottom feeders. They were considered the cockroaches of the sea. People saw them as giant, disgusting bugs. At the time, lobsters were more likely to be ground up and used as fertilizer than eaten.
Yeah.
And the bloody back insult was also a double entendre because, yes, they were wearing red coats, but also they were often disciplined in front of the whole town by being whipped until their backs were bloody. So to translate the insult, you rascal, you bloody back, you lobster scoundrel, that really means you mean dishonest fellow, a villain who's continuously beaten until bloody, you poor, bottom-feeding, worthless, disgusting ocean cockroach.
I could see how after being subjected to that every single day for having been sent here by my commanding officer, a job that I willingly signed up to do as a commissioned officer, my feelings have gone past hurt and just gone straight to rage.
And the regular soldiers weren't even getting paid a living wage for it.
Yeah.
And so soldiers' barracks, guard stations, the sentries inside of them, and even officers were often targeted and taunted. the colonists would start the conflict. The soldiers would tell them to cut it out or face the consequences. And the colonists would say, can I have some of those consequences, please?
Bet you won't. Bet you won't, boy.
Literally that. I need you to understand. Literally that. They were just like, come on, go ahead. Do it. You won't. Do it.
We outnumber you. Bet you won't.
Yeah. Well, in the beginning, the conflict.
What do we like hanging from the tree? What do we like hanging from the Liberty Tree? Lobsters.
And in the beginning, the conflicts didn't often end in violence, but as we've recently discussed, violence became more and more frequent as tensions rose. The thing is, the courts wouldn't work for anyone. One soldier who was convicted of robbery was sold as an indentured servant when he couldn't pay the fines. Though, weirdly enough, that one might have been a favor to the soldier, because when an officer came to take him back, he wouldn't go. And the townspeople did enjoy helping soldiers desert.
Okay.
But at the same time, when soldiers would try to press charges for the violence done against them, they couldn't find a single justice of the peace or official to prosecute offenders or bring the cases to trial. In some cases, they couldn't even get a warrant issued.
Hey, remember earlier when we mentioned that judges didn't always have law degrees and sometimes we're just upstanding citizens, but then also we're talking about two cities, New York and Boston, although right now we're still in Boston, where if a court decision went poorly, which, by the way, this has happened several times in episodes, a court decision went poorly and a mob went, no, we disagree. And then they went to talk to the judge about changing his mind, and they changed his mind for him. So that begins to impact the justice system. And some of these soldiers had legitimate grounds for, hey, so I had my arm broken because I wore the wrong color coat and was doing my freaking job. Could I get some damages for that? And the judges be like, no, because if I side with you, they side against me. Bye.
Exactly. And that was one of the problems they faced as well, is that if the court proceeding didn't go the way that the public thought it should, if they weren't going to intimidate a judge, they would go to the person who they saw as guilty, and they would seek justice for themselves. So, but
it's a problem. That's not good behavior. That's mob mentality.
Mm-hmm.
It's super easy to lose the thread there,
and they often did.
Yeah.
But basically,
listen, this isn't really a spoiler if you paid attention, even in your public history class. We barely made it through this revolution, y'all. We squeaked it
by the skin of our teeth.
And the French. That's how we did it.
Mostly the French.
We're speaking very confidently about what happened. It almost didn't.
Consistently, it kept almost not happening. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But at this point, the townspeople had the courts on their side, but the British officers and soldiers would interfere as if they were above the law. So the townsperson could take the soldier to court, but then an officer would show up and get his guy back as if they were above the law, which would really complicate things after the Boston Massacre, which wasn't really a massacre. But I can't believe how close we are to talking about it on Founded. But thank you for listening to this episode of Founded. I hope you found something interesting. Drop an email at foundedhistory@gmail.com and let me know what you want to find out next. Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, click dots, ring bells, and do all the things that make it easier for more folks to find Founded. And remember, we don't see history repeat itself, but we continue to hear the echoes. We'll see you next time. Well, you'll see us.